hello, and namaste. And welcome to today's Nugget of Zen. A special segment of the Almost Daily Zencast. May I be at peace. May my heart remain open. May I awaken to the light of my own nature. May I be healed. May I be a source of healing for all beings. Attributed to, generically, Buddhist Tradition. Artist, author, and meme maker unknown. Image has been manipulated since I found it and used under the assumption of that one particular creative license. Hello and namaste. Welcome to today's Nugget of Zen. I am your humble host, the incorrigible Mr. Zeppo. And I wanted to share with you this mantra and sort of walk through an unpacking of it because it's deceptively simple and yet complex and richly profound, in my humble opinion. In terms of how I came across it, I want to insert some disclaimers here for the audience. For anybody new who hasn't heard me disclaimer my disclaimers of disclaimering, I am not a guru, etc., etc., etc. There's a lot more there, but I just wanted to get to that particular bullet point. I don't pretend to be a guru. I don't claim to be enlightened, especially not with a capital E. And we can get into the discussion as to why I don't think I should ever, that anybody can yet claim to be enlightened. We may be achieving epiphanies and having experiences and signposts and realizations and deep, profound, inspired inspirations and whatnot. And even sensations of change and healing and evolution. But I warn anyone from presuming that they themselves have achieved Buddhahood and or buying into and giving your faith and or especially your money to anyone running around claiming to have achieved complete and total enlightenment, Buddhahood, etc. Because if you ain't woke if you can't activate your Merkaba and jump around transdimensionally and visit other people in their living rooms, having not, used conventional forms of transportation. And there's a whole story behind that. I don't mean to go off on that tangent. We are in an infinite evolutionary practice that can be called ascension. I'm not a Debbie Downer. I'm not here to ruin the parade, folks. I am here to share my comprehension, understanding, insight, and understanding as I know it through phenomenological experience of the universe itself. And I am a fan of this mantra, to not get too wildly off track. Like I said, I'm not entirely sure where I came across it. And having disclaimed my disclaimers, I I know that it came to me in that magical kind of way that some content just sort of shows up. You don't mean to find it, but then you're staring at it again, maybe for the second and or third time, and you're like, huh, well, I better take a screenshot of that. And I apologize for any appearance of and or like actual offense to, for whatever slim chance, by whatever impossible statistic, the original creator of this meme is listening to the show. It's a beautiful image. It's simple, and my modifications were just to make it sort of fit into my schema. And then, of course, for today's show, I added the title, Today's Nugget of Zen. That's my work there, my choices. But the image is of a bright red water flower, which I guess could be part of the lily family. I don't know. I'm not a horticulturalist. But it's one of those beautiful flowers, lotuses type things that just opening up, and it's clearly sitting and being reflected by a mostly still but kind of just ever so gently rippling body of water that it's growing in, out of, floating on top of, whatever. And the words are put there in very simple white text. And like I said, there's no author, there's no there's no tweet handle, it's just the mantra. And when it comes to spiritual things, if I may take the opportunity to say such a bold statement, when it comes to spiritual things, the authenticity of it is not any one individual's guarantee or charismatic assurance or, personal claim because of whatever their rationale is. As the saying goes, the proof is in the pudding. Like, spiritual practice, if there's one thing that should be cleared up, is not some ideology that must be conformed to. Spiritual practice is, in its own way, an organic experience that's entirely unique to the individual. So, if you're perusing such things as spiritual practices or traditions to practice, don't be too disappointed if one doesn't do anything for you. Obviously, there's parameters there, right? Like, do what you want sounds awesome until you realize that what somebody wants is to run around chopping people's heads off with a fucking buzzsaw. That's not cool. You can't endorse do what you want like that, right? Like, there's limits. But when it comes to spiritual investigation, right? It's an investigation. You're not supposed to buy into some doctrine or dogma or ideological construct that someone else has built. Although, that's not inherently evil. Let's put it this way. The litmus test is, does whatever thing, idea, product, mantra, tradition, exercise, practice, idea, tradition, etc., does it genuinely and authentically facilitate your own deepening of your understanding, comprehension, and communion, which is a very specific word, with your own self, your deeper self, your divine self? That's a lofty statement, isn't it? And it comes with its assumptions. One must presume to have accepted that there is divinity at all, right? Not et al, like I usually use, but at all. That it exists and that it, in theory, to some degree or another, resides within us. May I be so bold as to say that might very well be the case, dear friends and listeners. This mantra, like I said, it came across my desk, my virtual desk, my stream, my flow, and I was enamored with it because, to put it simply, it resonated. It seemed to agree with me. I felt that it was truly, and in a virtuous way, to use the word, without specific baggage to any given tradition, right? It seemed virtuous. It seemed righteous, if I may even be so bold as to say that. May I be at peace. First off, it is my given understanding that this kind of mantra or prayer or statement or whatever word you want to use, if it truly does come from the richness or depth of a specific Buddhist tradition, of which there are many, like Buddhism is not one monolithic thing. And that's not just because I'm into saying that nothing is a singular monolithic thing. It's because it's gone through many iterations. It's gone through many layers and interesting tangents of evolutionary development. For a brilliant, not too overwhelming, and yet incredibly concrete, well-written, authoritatively researched, and arguably, in my humble opinion, kind of undebunkable book about the various traditions that one might call Buddhist, not including the current Myanmar like tyrannical state and any weird spiritual utterances thereof. You should go straight to Alan Watts' The Way of Zen. Genuine, authentic, real-life, personal, non-financially causated endorsement. All infinite of my thumbs, both hands, in all instances, all bodies, all worlds, all timelines, are enthusiastically up and authentically telling you that and I've said it before, if you haven't gotten this book, go get it. I don't even know, but it might be available online, like in PDF, like you don't even have to get a physical book if you're that kind of person. I digress. What was I saying? Based on my understanding, of which I owe very much, academically speaking, to Alan Watts' book, not just the content thereof as written by him, which is beautiful, eloquent, moving, and dare I say, in some way, shape, or form, sort of evocative of a Zen state of mind, and in that it helps to magically induce in a person that reads, because obviously it doesn't work with things that don't read. It helps to induce a meditative state, a contemplative state. It helps to evoke without telling you what to think, right? Without dogmatic conditioning. From all of that, I was also going to add, not the least of which the content, which is all of that plus more, and a bag of chips, and beautifully, like, if you've ever heard Alan Watts on YouTube or some audio thing, because there's a lot of his audio recordings floating about the internet and on various apps, etc., go check those out. It's not the same experience. It's completely different, and it's a little bit more of a complicated dance if you're going to go straight to just listening to all the audio recordings, because he's very British. But what's delightful is if you invest a little bit, like 15 minutes, 20 minutes of really listening to his voice and then go read his book, it's all delightfully in that voice. It's magical. So in addition to the wealth of what he wrote, and I mean this sincerely, this isn't some like, but wait, there's more kind of gimmicky thing. This is like a legitimate thing. Especially for people who aren't used to thinking about books this way, his bibliography is profound. Like, plunder the depths of that, dear man, and or woman, and or whatever your gender is. Like, own a copy of Alan Watts' The Way of Zen, and this is not just a miracle of this particular book or this particular author. If you are of a studious, like, readerly, kind of nerdly academic type that loves to learn, trust that whatever conspiracy theory, whatever you've heard on the internet, blah, it's worth its 10 cents and its pound of salt, which is a really weird hybrid of two different sayings. But it doesn't hold a candle to going to an authoritative source. And I mean truly, genuinely, respectably authoritative. And you'll find even that, even those people have, flaws and corruptions and sins, etc. But Go to a really respectable authoritative force on a subject. Find, their books and investigate vis-a-vis their bibliography. Now, if it's a very commercial book, it may not have a very dense bibliography. Bless their hearts. But if it's written by a truly sincere academic-minded person, it will have at least a hefty one, a medium-sized one, if not a mind-blowingly profound one, like the one in the back of Alan Watts' book. And you should go with that book to a serious library. Now, if you live out in the middle of nowhere and the only library in town is the only library anywhere that you can get to, fair enough. Good luck, God bless, and ask them if they can borrow libraries from the nearest university, etc. Don't feel down just because you live in podunk nowhere. And I'm speaking theoretically and not non-judgmentally. I know what that's like. I've known remote places, and there's a beauty to that. So don't underestimate them. But I digress. But if you happen to be lucky enough to live near a decent-sized city library and or a really respectably large university library, go with that book and the bibliography and the bits you want to I'm going to spend several hours because I blocked out the day. I don't even know if libraries are open right now. In the future, not to jump into a barrel of rabbit warren holes there, when things are at some new respectable level of normal type operation without having gone back to some normal that was not normal. Such a loaded statement. Go to the library and do this thing where you bring the bibliography and you find these other books and you find the words and you dip into these various books and read deeply, but also don't read the whole book because that would take you months. And then jump around and look through their bibliography and because that network of various sources of deep scholarship. Sure, the cynics have a lot to say about that, and the conspiracy theorists, the really cynical conspiracy theorists, will have you believe no book is worth reading, which is a load of horseshit. And I digress. Where was I going with all of that? Yes, from my understanding, which I owe a big tip of the hat, thank you very much to such type individuals as Alan Watts and others. When in a Buddhist tradition, in an English translation, because I can't say that I run around reading stuff in their original language, right? I don't pretend to be that which I am not. But it is reasonable to come to the understanding or the conclusion that in such a statement, such as, may I be at peace, all the use of I, it's not the typical referring to just yourself in your little envelope and your little life and your little context over there in what little town you're in whatever little corner of the universe you're at, right? It's the I am, the deeper consciousness, which is involved and invited and evoked simultaneously. It is, dare we say, and I don't mean to offend anyone of a particular tradition that might find this offensive, but it is the I am that is that which God is saying when he says, be still and know I am. And in other places he says, I am that I am. May I be at peace. When you say this mantra, and you can apply this to your general thinking, right? In general. When you say this and or any other mantra in which you reference yourself, be conscious, mindful, and present, rooted in the knowledge, in the acknowledgement Ooh, interesting connection there, if you ever thought about it. The word knowledge and the word acknowledgement, like knowing is an action. And there's some act of recognizing that gives us knowledge. Know, recognize, acknowledge. It's 5 a.m, which is why I sound stuffy. And I keep pronouncing acknowledge like it's spelled with a G, and it's not. Acknowledge your recognition and acceptance of this spiritual statement. Now, if you don't believe that, that's understandable and respectable. And I don't ask you to take my own personal word for it, right? But that knowing of that which it is that you are is important in Buddhist tradition, and in others, not the only one. It's important in a clearer understanding of the Judeo-Christian tradition. It's an important thing, I think, in our realities, right? But I digress. Let's wrap up unpacking this mantra, not go sideways on new tangents. Let us suffice it to say, let us come to this sort of summation. It is my chosen understanding and interpretation, and confirmed by phenomenological experience, which you have to just go, oh, he's making that claim, and the only way I can confirm that claim is to go seek my own phenomenological experience. And it may take you lifetimes, but I digress. I imbue these statements with the mindful awareness and acknowledgement and creating space for perception of I am being, the root of my consciousness is rooted in the consciousness that is the root of all consciousness. Not in an egoic kind of way, like I know that I am not God, but God is the very fabric of reality. God is busy being that. Whatever God is, should it have personhood, that personhood, should it exist in some tangible form, in some locality somewhere, is displaced, arguably, because it is busy being, manifesting, becoming, acting as, performing as, all that which is, including you, including me, and internally speaking, the me, myself, and I triumvirate of the chorus of many voices that you hear inside your own head. The angel on one shoulder and the little devil on the other, and the injured child in the corner, and the central pillar at the core of yourself, which you hang the sensation of being on, like saying, I'm that. This is me. When you say me, I mean this. When I say me, I mean my most inner self. That divinity being acknowledged, and the mechanisms of this reality being of the process of manifesting as something that is also acknowledged, one can explore what you might casually call word magic, right? Now, there are formalists who say this shouldn't be tinkered with. There are technocrats of the spiritual and the divine and the magical that have an argument for saying that without the proper teaching, i.e. indoctrination, you can't be running around trying to weave natural magic with language. But there's also, the Zenists, at the core of Buddhism, to the best of my understanding, as a collection of traditions, is a sort of consensus around a centralized teaching that in one way, shape, or form, the Buddha says, pish posh. Mind you, This is my language, not theirs. I'm summarizing for you. I'm gestating my thoughts. In some way or another, the Buddha teaches something that could be expressed as pishpash. The divinity is already you. And it has... Do you see plants preoccupied with dogma? Do you see the birds and the bees preoccupied with technocratic, ideologically constructed? No, of course not. The river flows, the wind blows, the sun shines. The human should be, because it's a human being. Now, what that is complex and annoying and involves a lot of free will and choices and consequences. And there are thus, therefore, needs that must be met, like languages and communication and the establishing of a consensus around how to behave. But that can be guided by the sheer blinding beauty of an authentic connection to that which might be called spirit or soul or divinity. And that through that, we approach an elegant, sophisticated, sort of intuitive expression of self that isn't hung up on a bunch of crazy abstract things like dogma and or ideological models, political or otherwise. Coming back to the mantra, you're invoking these things. You're choosing to weave the mental image using the expression of your own words to try and evoke these things, because arguably they can be invoked and made manifest. May I be at peace. Now there's one of those things that's a question of the ages. Is peace brought about through power and the execution thereof? Is peace bought? Is peace bought? Can you buy peace? That was a happy accident. But I was trying to say, is peace brought about by authority, by violence? Arguably, again, this is sort of drawing from a deep well to try to find a simple answer. Arguably, the collective of Buddhist traditions say peace is chosen and then created or communicated, shared, given away. May I be at peace is one way to literally invoke peace where there has been the lack of. Have you been stressed out? Have you been frazzled? Then sit down and consciously harness your breath into a regenerative, healing, healthy, relaxing rhythm and be at peace by choosing to invoke it. May my heart remain open. This is a simple and yet complex abstract one, which, interestingly, has deep, I feel, quite obvious connections and crossover to the Christian tradition if we look at it through the more mystic or gnostic lenses, as opposed to the more postmodern, derivative, dogmatic, belief-driven, prophet-driven models. May my heart remain open. Well, obviously it's not literal, right? Because to do that is to end the beating thereof. But in an allegorical, figurative, spiritual way, openness is specifically several things. Vulnerability, one is vulnerable when one is open. That makes sense intuitively, right? You don't need a technical drawing. You don't need to understand what it means to open your heart to know that if you expose yourself, you are vulnerable to what? We don't know. Retribution, reaction, response, anger, judgment, ego traps, ego traps, ego traps, ego traps. When your heart is open, arguably the Jesus taught, you remain, one, present and aware of the world's suffering, two, capable of compassionately forgiving others for the sins that they are committing, literally. Isn't that what Jesus taught? Spiritual work of any kind, of any degree, of any design, requires an open heart, requires us to be able to look inward. And the heart is one of those figurative places, one of those magical, non-literal, we're pointing, I mean, it's both, right? There's a literal machine, a literal muscle pump, and it physically, literally, generates electromagnetic waveforms, patterns, a force field. And we can get into some of the interesting crossover as to how that relates to the esoteric. But mystically, magically, symbolically, the heart is the root of our compassion, of our ability to receive emotional information, context, energy, vibe, and also to heal, to forgive, to express compassion. May I awaken to the light of my own nature. Can we achieve that? Can we tune into that? Because achieve is such a greedy word. It's such a conquest-driven word. We don't want to get too bound up in those energies. But think about this delightfully delicate and organic progression. Can we hope? Can we even aspire to awaken to the light of our own nature if we are not at peace? And we do not have our hearts vulnerably and yet blissfully open, by which we can directly commune, relate to heart with one another? I say no, because one of the secrets, one of the sort of lost and or forgotten and or maybe erased sort of understandings that was passed on, wisdom teachings, and I believe this to be so because, perhaps this is not impossible. Perhaps it's some new level of understanding that's coming to be and is newly being expressed. But I suspect there's nothing new under the sun, as some others of specific opinion, like my own, have said in other eras. The sort of curiously, delightfully ignored secret is that we are not alone. No man is an island, right? And that both spiritually and, if I may apply some terms, some may say incorrectly, but I say, really? I don't know, maybe not. But esoterically, alchemically, metaphysically, we are more than not alone. We are directly bound to one another. We are directly plugged into one another vis-a-vis a healthy, a real, an organic, a natural, a necessary, functioning form, part and parcel to our spiritual experience, of which we may be generally ignorant, which is a network that plugs us all in together. This is not directly extrapolated from this Buddhist tradition. No. Some of you may be wondering. If I were sitting here with live guests, I would imagine that'd be a naturally occurring question. But I am applying to it, right? Because our practices are not just for the benefit of ourselves. But it does come full circle, this little practice, if you noticed. But by proceeding through its progression and contemplating it and meditating on it on a step-by-step basis, I think one is well guided. It's a good meditation, and therefore I'm just sort of like drawing out, not drawing, like who was it? Oh, I forget the reference. Anyways, may I awaken to the light of my own nature. That's deep, and there's a lot to be said about it. And the Buddhist tradition has many interpretations of what one's true nature really is. But it boils down to a sort of consensus of this notion that divinity, whatever it is not only responsible for the existence of reality as we understand it, but it is actively participating in that process and is essential, integral. And thus, when we look within and we strive to clarify through abdication the internal ability we latently and sort of forgottenly have, like that we forgot about it, right? We've forgotten. We've been disconnected from our own internal world and forgotten that we have this capacity to connect to the internal bandwidth of experience. And that the light of our own nature is truly the light of divinity itself, shining from the center of all centers. May I be healed. It's something we all need on multiple levels. From the most simplest of mundane things, i.e., the things that get us sick here in the bodily form. Not that that's anything too trivial or to be taken lightly, given our current historical context. But also in the spiritual level. At the levels of energy and mind that are integral and inseparable to the existence and operation of ourselves as we know ourselves physically. And as some have suggested throughout time, if we focus our healing work there, on those levels, instead of just on the material envelope, and in a sort of limited fashion of like applying band-aids to the surface expression of what may be deeper issues, allegorically speaking. May I be healed. Is that a supplication? Is that a command? Is that an acknowledgement of an ongoing process? May I be a source of healing for all beings. We come back to this idea of the interconnectivity, the intrinsically networked nature of our species, despite whatever individuation we experience. As we heal ourselves, we facilitate, assist, uplift, and invest in the manifesting of the healing of all others. Therefore, it can be said it is supremely important and of deep significance that we attend to the inner workings of our mind and our spirit and our soul and our energetic selves, these aspects of ourselves that typically we sort of treat like the inner workings of an automobile engine, which we sort of neglect until it's on the verge of obviously falling apart because of lack of service, lack of maintenance. We're at that kind of place where the calling is to return inwards and attend to that. Because each and every single one of us is deeply suffering. Even those of us who feel comfortably fine about the mundane world and who don't care about what's going on, or feel privileged to be in a position to feel fine, to be okay, to be whatever, right? And that's always going on, no matter what historical moment you might find yourself in. But life is itself this contest between the distractions and the spiritual callings, which are subtle, complex, and internalized, therefore easily dismissed. Having rambled long enough at you, my friends, I pray that you may explore and experiment for yourself with today's particular sharing. Go and practice this. Sit with yourself in silence with some gentle music that feels right to you and is stimulating. And breathe deeply and slowly and release that which no longer serves you energetically, mentally, emotionally, physically. And recite these words silently, out loud. There is something to be said to the power of hearing one's own voice. And say, may I be at peace. May my heart remain open. May I awaken to the light of my own nature. May I be healed. And may I be a source of healing for all beings. Amen. Namaste, folks. May peace, love, and grooviness blossom in your heart. This has been today's Nugget of Zen. As always, I humbly thank you for tuning in. Today's Nugget of Zen, a special segment of the Almost Daily Zencast, produced by CTAG Studios, hosted by yours truly, the incorrigible Mr. Zeppo. Today's music attribution was Today's Nugget of Zen, TNZ, intro-outro by DJ Zed, created using Remix Live, an atmospheric D&B 101 remix. Namaste.